Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi, this being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Nancy Drew. It's been 2 weeks since what I assume would have been the original season 1 finale. Everything's, we beat the Glaco, we survived the death curse, yay! Everyone's kind of moving on with their life. We see, Bess on the yacht and everything, and I think it's just kind of probably like her embracing the Marvin that she is, but she's just kind of realigning her chakras and stuff like that. George and Nick, also like George getting so close to Nick's mom is pretty dope, and he's like, I don't know what's scarier, the fact is that the fact is you two are getting along like that or not, if that's a good thing or not. But also, we just see Ace just like chilling and relaxing. Like everyone's, returning to some form of a normal life, trying to decompress after everything. And Nancy is doing community service because, hey, let's not forget she got busted for the whole breaking into the morgue thing. So she's got like 500 hours of community service, and involves her working at the morgue, where both the coroner, Connor, as well as Tamura, kind of are like, they make the same damn joke about like, oh, you missed the spot, ha 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 ha. It's like they're such an assholes about it. But obviously there was a body that was found in like a backyard, and it's like, what's this all about? And Nancy's looking at it over like the coroner's shoulder, which is also interesting too, because I think that's a little bit of abuse of power, but I guess it doesn't count in the sense that like Connor was like, hey, I want you to look after my kid. It's like, what? That doesn't count as part of my job, like my community service at the morgue. It's like, well, my kid's here in the morgue, so it pertains to your community service. Get to it. But obviously, Nancy jumping right into another investigation I thought was really interesting. Granted, I even love it's like, oh, don't do anything because the camera's going to watch you. I was like, how are you going to get around that? I figured as much, like, oh, you probably want the camera to see you because most likely some supernatural stuff is about to go down, and you want that caught on camera so you don't get blamed for something later on. I'm sure the footage would probably go out at just the right time to kind of not allow for that. But she blocks the camera, starts examining the body. Well, she also finds out that her dad just got this case because she's like, oh, you got a new client. He's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to win. She's like, what? They find a body in the backyard? And he stops and she's like, oh, you got that case. It's like, where are you right now? And she's like, nowhere in particular. He's like, you're in a morgue right now, aren't you? That's where you're doing your community. He's like, okay, I'm going to talk to you later, because he knew that if he stayed on the line, Nancy would get mixed up in all of this. So he's like, no, I'm going to let that happen. So he tried to cut that conversation a little short. But, interestingly enough, even when she goes home, she ends up finding said dead body had followed her home. And as I wonder, is it simply because, like George said, like my mom said, don't never steal from the dead. So because she stole something from inside the dead body, it followed her home. And even I was like, are you going to call the cops? Because you could tell them, hey, I was like, I guess in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make sense to do this. But I was about to say, like, hey, you could call them and be like, oh, someone dumped this dead body here, but it's going to be a little suspicious. Because I'm sure she could be like, you really think there's no footage of me transporting the dead body? She did cover the camera, so who knows if they could say, like, in that moment, you passed off the dead body to someone else and they got it back to your blood, And the way Ace puts it later on is like, yeah, Tamura already thinks they kind of have a dead thing with dead bodies, so it's like, yeah, I can't really deal with that. I love it's like, oh, it's supposed to be game night and everything. It's like, oh, and I love Bess. Oh my God, Nancy, did you kill someone? She's like, what? No, Bess, the body followed me home. And what really surprised me is how quickly everyone was like, well, I guess we should be the ones to investigate. I was like, oh, that surprised me because I knew Nancy was going to be all about it. I thought they would have like got on Nancy's case about it, but it's like everyone's like, well, I guess, no one else has any supernatural experience. So Bess is like, oh, so just so no one else could get hurt, we should get on top of this. And it's like, and George is like, we are the one with the supernatural experience and stuff like that. And because Nick is looking around like, wait, am I the only? He seemed like he was the only one that was like, we shouldn't be going down this route again. Granted, he didn't fight it too much. So it's like Nancy's like, hey, you guys take care of the autopsy. And it's like, we're not going to do an autopsy in here. And Bess is like, you're right. Let's do it in the living room. There's a lot more space. I'm like, everyone jumped on that a lot quicker than I thought they would. I would have expected, like I said, a little more hesitation. But even Nick was like, are we really sure we want to kind of go down this route? We literally just got this stuff out of our lives. And Ace is putting on the gloves. Is like, honestly, all this investigating with Nancy the past couple months kind of gave him purpose. So all of them actually kind of enjoy it and miss it. And like, it didn't take too long for Nick to kind of get in the flow of things and not really be like, oh man, we shouldn't have done. It's like, no, like they all kind of missed it. It's like, yeah, we had a near-death experience, but honestly, you know, they're actually really good. It's like, we're actually really good at this, like, especially as a team. So, like, I think all of them kind of got sucked into the investigation. I even love that one point. It's like, oh, shoot, we're going to use this for the top layer and use this for the outer layer. And Nick's like, and Ace is like, oh, do you think, you what, were you thinking the other way around? And Nick's like, no, I wasn't thinking that. But I thought that was so fascinating. This episode also brought up something interesting I didn't think about. Was like, right, I forgot about the whole Ace being in a coma thing. Like after he was in that accident with Tiffany's sister. It's Laura, right? I'm blanking. I believe it was Laura, right? So I completely forgot about that. So it's like, right, him and George have that commonality of like, right, she went through something like crazy supernatural, got him on a death's doorstep type of thing, and so did he. So he has a little bit of a common ground. So I think that could be something similar that they go through. Like because he's offering Nick, like, because Nick doesn't want to push too hard because he saw what happened with pushing too hard with Nancy. But it's also like George isn't the type to be pushed. If anything, George is the type to push back. So, you know, Nick doesn't want to push her into a conversation she doesn't want to have. But obviously, as we see through the episode, like, she's not herself. Like, she's blanking out, like, losing time. And even at one point, she's singing in French. And Nick was like, George, were you just singing in French? She's like, no, I don't even speak French. And he was like, he could tell something was definitely up. And it does seem like it's kind of leaning. The ending and everything does seem like it confirms my theory. Because I was wondering what that necessarily meant. So it does seem like they're both occupying the same body. Much like the whole Tiffany thing. But I think this is a little different. Because George was alive when Tiffany initially possessed her. George was dead in that moment. So I think in that moment, Odette slipped into her body just as George's soul was returned. So technically there's two souls occupying body at the same time, and so it's reacting a little. That's why like George is still in control at certain points but kind of blanks out, I think, because two souls shouldn't be occupying the body. I think that's probably going to be an issue in its own right. I mean, for all we know, Odette being inside of her body might be the only thing that's keeping George alive. Maybe it's the only thing, like, let's say like George's soul already kind of left and Odette being in her body and the blanket, because we don't fully know what the blanket did to bring her back, like what the exact circumstances were that did it draw her soul back or whatever. Because Ace and George had talked about it, because he remembered a little bit about being in a coma, like, you know, in the snow in his pajamas, but George remembers, you know, feeling what was it? I think she said she was feeling like warm or something, but then like her body went, she was feeling all the pain, and then her body went numb, and then she saw water and the sun and the light, but then everything grew dark. And in that moment, like, she found Nancy on top of her. Like, so even when she's out of it, she doesn't know where she's going. She doesn't remember what's happening to her. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see what that means long scale, because is she going to tell the others about Odette being in her body, or is Odette going to keep her from doing that? Is it going to be a thing of George is going to remember, but then, like, is Odette going to make her forget? I don't know. Because even George later on says this is something she's got to handle on her own. Like, she figures it's probably kind of like PTSD from dying, like, obviously. But obviously it's a supernatural issue, and it's like maybe there's no getting Odette out of George's body without ripping George's soul out as well. Once again, speculation on my part, so we'll kind of have to wait and see. But regardless, some other elements to this was Nancy going to Hannah for help, which Hannah was like, bump no, because the fact is you came in here, you stole from me bad enough, but also we have no idea what the ramifications are going to be for what you did. Like, she's like, I can't even get all the boxes, like the security system, I can't even fix it now. But, you know, it's like, hey, Nick he handles mechanical stuff like that all the time. Granted, yeah, he can also help, you know, on the supernatural front, but obviously for Nancy, it's a situation of, I made a mistake, I got to make it right. Which, you know, obviously she did the same thing with the Aglika thing. Like, more so than anything, it wasn't her life that she was worried about. It was self-preservation, sure, but it was also because all her friends were in danger because of her. So for Nancy, it's like, I've got to make it right on many different fronts, because she's thinking, like, this dead body situation could be connected to her. Because it turns out when they opened up the dead body, there's a whole bunch of, like, bones and animal bones and flowers in there, but they're like flowers and stuff that were extinct years ago. Even that those spider-looking things that Nancy pulled out of its mouth are like things that have been extinct for like 100 years. So I was like, how is this all possible? I love that Connor shows up eventually. Because for one, the body started bleeding too. And it's like, okay, this is a lot. This is extreme. What's going on here? They're cleaning up the mess. And it turns out Connor was there. I was like hoping they were going to work their way around it. But he makes his way in. And he's about to, I'm going to call the cops on you, Nancy. And she's like, oh, what? Could admit to them that you left a known felon along with a burglary felon along with the body. So it's basically like you're jeopardizing your own career if you do this. So it's like he's like, I'm gonna get to Gurney. I even love that when he's driving away with his son, he's like, your mom is gonna ask questions. It's like, oh, like why would she ask that? He's like, she might not directly ask it, but she's gonna ask with her eyes. Though, it's like, okay, how is it, because he's trying to say, like, my son shouldn't be driving up front with me in the morgue vehicle, so I just thought that was interesting. But now it's like, okay, the body was bleeding and everything, bleeding fresh blood, almost like it's alive, and then it turns out said dead body is alive. That was an interesting turn of events, but then, like, especially because Connor sees it firsthand that the body was alive, and I love that he literally has a breakdown. He's like, it was here and now it's gone. It's gone. He's repeating himself, and Bess is like, come on. She has to grab him by the arm as she's driving them back to Nancy's place. But it turns out that this wasn't actually a dead body. It was actually a being known as Ethereum that basically took on the human form. It basically sewed together a body. That's where all that stuff came. It's a makeshift human body that this thing made. So it's one of those things that was sealed away and kind of got awakened because of what Nancy did. So it turns out this thing like hunts humans, in particular as a thing for children, which explains why it waited to strike and try to go after Connor's son Leo when he was alone. But luckily we find out like, oh, he had his toy to protect him because the Charles he's been talking to and talking about. Because at first I was thinking that's where we were going to go from the beginning of the episode. It's like, oh yeah, Charles. I was thinking it was going to be like an actual ghost. Lo and behold, it does turn out to be that case. I didn't realize it was going to be directly connected to the case like that. But it turns out Charles was one of the victims because this dates back years ago with like women in white. This particular woman, Edith Fowler, she was connected to one of the first people who made a deal with the Aglaika. So, I mean, obviously, I think we're always good. I mean, to be fair, Odette is still a part of the story, unbeknownst to the rest of the crew. But, so I think there's always going to be stuff pulled back to that because I'm sure, like, the Aglaika stuff obviously is the heart of all the supernatural stuff in like Horseshoe Bay, so I'm sure that's going to it's always going to be the epicenter, I think. Kind of like how in Teen Wolf, Beacon Hills is literally called Beacon Hill because it's one of those literal beacons for the supernatural that it will always attract the supernatural. So I think that's kind of what they maybe that's kind of what Horseshoe Bay has kind of become. I mean, maybe it has always been that way. As we see, like, all that supernatural stuff Hannah had locked up. What was it, like, I think she said, like, 2 centuries of, like, 2 centuries worth of, like, supernatural stuff built up and locked away. And obviously, 2 weeks ago, Nancy basically unleashed that on Earth because it's like we have no idea what exactly got released and how it's going to interact with any humans it comes in contact with. But, so they go back to talk to Charles, and I love that Bess is doing that boxy voice, and you have Nancy being like, oh my god, and Nick is like, no, let's see how it plays out. And once again, Nick does the thing of him putting on this fake accent, which I get giddy about accents. I love that, like, the actor who plays Nick is having to put on an American accent, because he's not American, at least I don't think he is. I mean, like, I looked it up, like, last season. I don't remember where he's from, but he's putting on an American accent if someone putting on a British accent, and he's kind of doing it awkwardly, and I'm like, that's got to break your brain a little bit because you're doing an accent of someone doing an accent. That's crazy. That'd be like me putting on a British accent to also have that British person put on a Spanish act, like a Colombian accent or something like that. That's why I'm like, that's got to break your brain a little bit. That's got to be weird to do, and especially do it with like you're like, oh, like I don't know how to do this accent. Like I'm supposed to be faking it, like I don't know how to do it, even though I can do it because it's very very close to his natural accent. It's stuff like that I get trippy about, because like anytime I find out like someone's not American, I'm like, oh, look at you, that's so dumb. Look at you putting on an American accent, because it's like, because there's some actors are so damn good at it. I was like, I would have never guessed you were not American if I did. Like the actress who plays Bess, so like when I actually looked that up and found out, like, oh, like, you know, last season I looked it up and it's like, oh, her real accent in the show is her own, the actress's natural accent, and it's like, oh yeah, you were putting on an American accent, even with, and I talked about it like Into the Badlands. I didn't know she was putting on an American accent. I was like, dude, I get trippy about that type of stuff. So nevertheless, I went on a huge tangent there. I do apologize. But they end up finding out that basically if they want to stop this thing, they need to basically call upon the spirits of all of its victims, all 12 of its prior victims, and to finish it off. Luckily, they were able to do it in time, because Ted and Charlie ended up getting like taken by this thing. It would have killed them, but luckily all the kids came together and it just like basically dragged this thing to wherever. We don't know whether that's to the afterlife. Like, did they kill the thing by doing it? Did they bury it back in the earth, killing it? Like, whatever the case may be. That was, once again, this show gets creepier and creepier. Like, and I like that, because I was like, and I talked about it before. I cannot believe I went into the show initially thinking like, oh, it's only going to have a small supernatural side to it, because some of the reports I was reading at the time, some of the articles suggested it was going to be a small supernatural thing, and it's like, nope, they fully leaned into the super. I mean, to be fair, considering everything that went down season 1, there's no way you can make this go back to like a everyday mundane type of crime. It's like, no, like mysteries and stuff. It's like, no. You have to lean into the supernatural stuff. Which I'm wondering, for the sake of this story, do they take from the more supernatural stories from the Nancy Drew books? Because like, I think the story titles are like titles from the Nancy Drew books. Like the episode titles, I think they actually come from particular cases and stories from the books. So I'm wondering, are they only taking all the supernatural stories from the books, or are they taking all the stories from the books and adding supernatural elements to them, or at least the ones that kind of allow themselves to be? I'm curious about that. That's something I need to look into. But yeah, just like obviously leaning into the more horror, eerie, spooky, supernatural element, I think is, you know, a really nice selling point of the show. But nevertheless. But when it was all said and done, they took care of... God, they even said the thing's name in the episode. I forgot. Like, the Therian is like the main group of what it belongs to, but it has a very specific name. I'm blanking on it. But regardless, after dealing with that, they have to deal with Tamura, and, you know, him and Connor comes in being like, oh yeah, it was a prank, they took the cadaver and blah blah blah, that's already being investigated. Tamura's like, okay, it's being investigated, okay. And she's like, oh, why wouldn't you believe Connor? He has ties to this, you know, he's been living here forever, he's worked here forever, so he knows the ins and outs of the you know, all the pranks in town and stuff like that. And what was it? Tamura said something kind of... he said something smart. He's like, that's not something. And then Nancy was like, that's not a real necktie. And he was like, both of you get out of my office. It's like, yeah, that's definitely going to be interesting, butting heads with him over and over again as, you know, as the season goes on. And it's like, well... that was all settled and done. See you back at the morgue. You still got 443 hours to go, Nancy. So, hey. But they also set up something else interesting in this episode, and that is, well, Nancy initially went to, you know, she was helping her dad investigate this case, because it's like, oh, you need money, you have money issues. So it's like, yeah, you need to build up your reputation and finances again. So she's trying to help out, but he didn't want her involved in the case. But then she also found out, wait, you're like really struggling. Like, how bad are things? He's like, no, I'm the parent, you're the kid, you're not supposed to worry about me. But at the end of the day, he's like, you're right. He's like, I know that you are going to investigate things no matter, regardless of what I want you to do. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way, because it's like, you investigated this, and I'm glad you did, because you ended up finding out the truth that Darlene was found innocent. Granted, I kind of had to pay back the retainer fee because there was no trial, because the charges were dropped and everything, but it was the right thing to do, and you found out the truth. So he's like, hey, I'm offering you to kind of work for me. You be my investigator, which I wonder will that eventually fall to everyone else. So like everyone else do their thing, but every once in a while, like Nancy's probably like, hey guys, let's join, like, my dad and these investigators, and we can all kind of work together. It's like they kind of want to fill that void anyway, so it'd be kind of pretty neat to kind of have them all on retainer. Now, whether that just ends up being Nancy and Nancy gets to distribute that pay as she sees fit, I don't know. She did say, like, but I gotta stay working at the Claw because, I mean, obviously George would be lost without me. But also, you see that look on Nancy's face because I think multiple things. For one, I think she's happy to kind of be working alongside her dad. I think that's probably kind of a dream come true in a certain extent. But also, it's like him recognizing, like, hey, you know, because now it kind of fills that void that, like, George was like, oh, aren't you sure you're not just trying to get neck deep in this investigation to kind of fill the void you have inside from not knowing what to do with yourself since you took your gap year? I think there's elements of that too, but I think so. I think it's just like, hey, I get to keep doing what I'm doing, and I like doing this, and I'm really good at it. And hearing her dad acknowledge it, like, you're not the kid anymore, you're going to do this anyway, and I want you to keep doing it because you're great at it. So I'm interested to see what the future cases are going to look like. Are they just going to end up handling normal cases all the time, or some supernatural stuff going to slip through? I'd assume so, because all this, all the things that Nancy ended up releasing, once again, we don't know how they're going to pop up in the story, in what shape or form. So a lot of interesting developments. I'm curious to see where things kind of go from here. There's still a lot of stuff we haven't tackled. The continuation of what Ryan's going to do about his family situation. We haven't heard anything about that. Plus the whole thing about Ace, his sister situation, which also this episode confirmed something, because I was like, yeah, I knew his mom was alive. I just felt like I was being crazy. But so something on that front, I'm assuming. The whole thing about his potential sister, like, I'm still waiting on how things kind of play out in that. But also, like I brought up, George's situation as we continue down that route with the whole her and Odette thing, how that's going to play out. Still haven't even really touched on the Marvin thing with Bess in a while. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. I'm also curious too, like, now that the coroner knows, like, oh yeah, like, Connor knows that, like, hey, there's some supernatural stuff out there. What's that going to look like now? I mean, I guess he's going to be a little bit more on Nancy's side of, like, all right, I'll cut some corners to help you out when, like, some crazy stuff happens and you need my help. Like, I mean, granted, she technically still works for him because she has to do it all for community service, but I'm curious to see how that all ultimately ends up shaking out. So I'm interested to see where this all ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.